The morning sun filtered gently through the lemon trees, casting soft golden shadows across the stone patio. The air was still, save for the quiet rustle of leaves and the faint chirp of distant birds. Lorraine stood barefoot at the edge of her pool, a red bucket tilted in her steady hands. The contents, fine white powder, cascaded into the water like silk, turning to steam. The surface hissed briefly, then calmed. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. But there was peace in the way she moved, measured, deliberate. For weeks, the neighborhood had watched her endure. Trash on her lawn, beer cans near her rose beds, late-night laughter echoing off her backyard walls. She never shouted, never retaliated. Until now. They thought it was just a harmless swim. What she did next? No one saw coming. Tell us where you're watching from, and wait till the end. Because some pools aren't for play. Mrs. Lorraine Fields had always believed in quiet things. The soft clink of her teacup in the morning, the way sunlight painted the pavers around her pool, the gentle rhythm of wind brushing past the yellow roses she planted with her husband 40 years ago. She wore floral shirts like they were armor, bright hibiscus, soft lavender, sunflower prints that made her neighbors smile. Widowed now, retired from decades of teaching high school chemistry, Lorraine spent her days tending to the backyard oasis she and her late husband had built by hand. Every brick laid, every bush trimmed, every stone around the pool set with care and memory. It wasn't just a yard. It was the last place that still felt like him. But peace has a way of drawing noise. Over the past few months, a group of local teens began sneaking into her backyard late at night. At first, it seemed harmless, just the splashes of youth, a few wet footprints on the concrete, echoes of laughter fading into darkness. But then came the beer cans floating at the edge of the pool, the cigarette butts nestled into her garden, the crude graffiti scrawled across the back fence in marker. They never asked, they never knocked. They came as if her home were a public park and she, just the old lady who didn't matter. Lorraine filed a report with the local patrol. She left polite notes by the gate. One evening, she even waited on the porch, offering conversation, asking them to please respect the space. They laughed, not cruelly, but dismissively, like her voice didn't carry weight, like she was background to their fun. But Lorraine was no stranger to being underestimated. She'd once taught classrooms full of rowdy teenagers who thought her soft tone meant she was weak, until her experiments left them speechless. She didn't shout then, and she wouldn't shout now, because Lorraine had never needed volume to make herself heard. She just needed time, and time, as it always did, was now on her side. The nights grew louder. What started as whispers and splashes had turned into full-blown parties, shrieks of laughter at midnight, music thumping from cheap Bluetooth speakers tossed beside her rose beds. Lorraine watched from her upstairs window in silence as shadows moved across the water, limbs flailing, cans cracking open, wet footprints dragging mud across the paver she once scrubbed with her husband every spring. The garden she had nurtured withered under careless feet. Her lawn chairs disappeared one by one, likely now lounging in someone else's backyard like stolen trophies. One evening, just before sunset, she caught them lingering by the fence. One boy looked up, saw her watching, and mimicked her slow walk, mocking her shuffle, laughing as he imitated her bent knees. Another boy made a sound, something between a cough and a bark, and the group dissolved into giggles before slipping away again like phantoms. Lorraine called the police again. They arrived late, took notes without looking up, promised a patrol car would pass by when available, They suggested motion lights, suggested a no trespassing sign, as if the one she already had wasn't clear enough. That night, they came back, bolder, louder. This time they tipped over her watering cans, dragged the garden hose into the pool, left a trail of snack wrappers leading from the gate to the diving board like it was all a game. Lorraine didn't cry. She didn't curse. She just stood still longer, thought longer. Something inside her began to shift, not into anger but into calculation. She remembered how, in college, she'd worked twice as hard for half the recognition. She remembered how she used to smile through meetings where her own research was credited to male colleagues. She remembered how, even in grief, people had told her she was strong only because she didn't scream. Lorraine had always stayed composed, had always stayed small, but not because she wanted to. The final straw came on a bright Sunday morning. She walked out with her tea to find the water sparkling under the sun, and a jagged shimmer along the edge. At first, she thought it was glitter. Then she saw it for what it was: broken glass, beer bottles, shattered and scattered across the bottom of the pool. A slow, deliberate vandalism, a danger disguised as carelessness. She set her tea down, walked to the shed, pulled out her long-handled skimmer and dipped it into the water, lifting each piece with a steady hand. Her movements were slow, but something in her breath had changed. The silence was no longer surrender. It was focus. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the fence line, and the air cooled into stillness, Lorraine opened the red-lidded container at the back of her shed. It smelled faintly of copper and chlorine, and memories of her classroom. She smiled, not out of joy, but recognition. They had no idea who they were dealing with, and she was just getting started. Lorraine didn't raise her voice. She raised her awareness. Each night, she sat by her upstairs window, not in frustration, but in observation. She began to track their comings and goings like a quiet scientist collecting data. What time they entered, how long they stayed, what they carried, how many beers it took before they started diving, when they were loudest, when they felt invincible. She noted everything, not out of malice, but precision. She studied them the way she once studied chemical reactions in her lab, patient and exact, knowing that every behavior, like every element, had a trigger point. And then she began her work. She started with the pool, her sanctuary turned battleground. Using nothing more than her deep knowledge of chemistry, she selected a treatment compound legal and approved, but designed to react with oil-based substances like sunscreen, alcohol, and certain skin products. Nothing dangerous, just unpleasant. A carefully measured amount of alum sulfate, harmless, but when mixed with contaminants, it caused minor skin irritation, itching, and a burning sensation in the eyes. Then came the motion-triggered sprinklers she positioned near the fence, disguised beneath rose bushes. The water pressure was sudden and high enough to send anyone scrambling. A trail of crushed chalk dust outlined the stepping stones, a trick she'd used years ago to catch sneaky lab students. It left unmistakable footprints when disturbed. And just in case, she had installed 3 new security cameras. One beneath the patio light, one inside a birdhouse, and one behind the barbecue grill. She also drafted a letter to a property attorney, explaining the repeated trespassing, damage, and potential liabilities, attaching photos and timestamps. And then she waited. The final night came like the others, humid, quiet, cloaked in the perfume of jasmine. Lorraine sat in her robe, sipping chamomile, when the gate clicked open. 3 of them this time, confident, shirtless. One of them wore her missing lawn chair like a crown. Another cracked open a drink and tossed the can into her flower bed. Then the splash came, followed by laughter. But within seconds, the mood changed. One boy started rubbing his arms furiously. Another yelled out, "It burns, man! What the hell?" A third tried to climb out, slipped, and landed hard on the deck, clutching his face. The water rippled with panic. Their screams shattered the stillness. One stumbled toward the bushes and vomited on her lawn. The sprinklers activated, spraying full force, soaking their clothes, their bags, their sense of control. The cameras caught every second, unblinking, emotionless. Lorraine stepped outside. She didn't rush. She moved slowly, the same way she did everything, with intention. The porch light framed her like a statue. Her robe hung gently around her, slippers whispering against the stone. She stopped at the edge of the chaos, arms folded, tea still steaming in her hand. "You might want to look up what alum sulfate does to uninvited swimmers," she said calmly. No yelling, no accusation, just a line sharp enough to split air. They froze. One tried to speak, but coughed instead. Another glared at her, teeth bared in humiliation, but it didn't land. Nothing landed, because Lorraine had already won. They scrambled to grab their clothes, slipping on wet tile, slipping on their own arrogance. She didn't move. She didn't help. She just sipped her tea and watched them run. The morning after the chaos, Lorraine rose with the sun. The world outside her window was damp and quiet, as if the night had rinsed it clean. She didn't rush. She brewed her tea, watered her porch plants, and gathered the neatly labeled flash drive from her desk drawer. It held 3 camera angles, high definition, time-stamped, undeniable. She dressed in her soft yellow blouse, the one with little stitched lilies at the collar, and walked down to the local precinct. No drama, no vengeance, just facts. She handed the footage over to the officer at the desk, along with printed stills and a summary of incidents dating back 3 months. "You'll want to show this to their parents," she said, her tone as gentle as ever. That afternoon, the neighborhood stirred like a hive touched too hard. Doors opened, cars pulled in and out of driveways, and one by one, parents came knocking, first the Jacksons, then the Myers, finally the Torres family. They came not with excuses, but apologies, red-faced fathers, tearful mothers, apologies for their sons, for their ignorance, for thinking their kids could do as they pleased with no consequences. Lorraine listened, not coldly, but not kindly either. She simply nodded. She had no interest in punishment, only understanding. And that part had finally begun. But the real story lived in what the neighbors didn't know. Beneath Lorraine's backyard was a truth as rooted as the oaks lining the street. She owned half of it all. Years ago, her family had sold off plots of inherited land to developers when the neighborhood was first built. The paperwork still bore her name. Lorraine Fields was not just a retired schoolteacher with a good memory and a beautiful pool. She was the reason the neighborhood existed at all. Her fence didn't just mark private property. It marked legacy. And yet, she had never flaunted it, never brought it up in HOA meetings, never corrected those who mistook her for just an old woman. Because grace doesn't demand recognition. It reveals itself when needed. The pool, once a symbol of intrusion and chaos, had transformed again. Now it shimmered with new meaning. It had never been about territory. It was about respect. You can't trample what you don't understand. And they had finally understood. Lorraine didn't post the footage online. She didn't text it to neighbors. She didn't bask in the viral attention that others might have chased. Instead, She walked to the far side of the yard, knelt beside the garden bed where her husband used to plant tomatoes, and began sowing new sunflower seeds. Her hands moved gently through the soil, patient and slow. She didn't need the world to know what she'd done. She only needed her garden to bloom again. The following weeks brought a quiet shift that couldn't be measured by noise or headlines, but by the subtle reordering of respect. The same neighborhood that once looked past Lorraine now looked toward her. The teens no longer appeared in the shadows. They came to her front door, hesitant but sincere, asking if there was anything they could do to help. One offered to repaint her back fence. Another trimmed her hedges. No one tried to jump the gate again. They knocked. They waited. They understood. On a breezy afternoon, a young mother from down the street stopped by with her daughter, a shy 12-year-old with tangled curls and curious eyes. "She's struggling with science," the mother explained, "and someone told me you used to teach." Lorraine smiled, not with pride, but with recognition. "Bring her by on Saturdays," she said. "We'll start with atoms. Everything big starts small." And just like that, her backyard, once invaded, became a sanctuary again, not just for her, but for others who came seeking something quieter, something true. Lorraine often found herself reflecting during these slow afternoons, sitting beside the pool with her tea in hand, the garden humming with bees, the water shimmering with peace. Her husband's voice drifted to her through memory, clear as if he'd just spoken. "Never shout at the world. Just make it notice." He had always believed in soft power, in letting your life speak where your words didn't have to. And now she understood that more deeply than ever. She didn't seek revenge. She never needed it. What she sought, what she achieved, was something far more lasting. Transformation. Not just of her backyard, but of perception, of community, of self. The woman who had once watched her garden be trampled now watched her neighbors rebuild it with her. The boys who once mocked her now carried her tools. The mothers who once waved in passing now lingered to ask for advice. She added a new sign to the edge of the pool, carefully carved and nailed beneath the deck light. It read, "This home runs on memory, dignity, and chemistry." 3 things that had never failed her. As she raked the soil near the sunflowers, she thought of all the times she had stayed quiet in rooms where she should have spoken, smiled when she should have resisted. She realized that silence wasn't always surrender. Sometimes it was strategy. And dignity, when tested, didn't crack. It crystallized. It became something stronger, sharper. Something that didn't just protect, it taught. Lorraine's story wasn't shared on the evening news. It wasn't turned into a viral post. But it lived in the changed rhythm of her neighborhood, in the respect that now lingered like scent on the breeze, in the footsteps that paused before her gate, and in the blooming sunflowers, tall and golden, swaying in the very soil that had once been disrespected. She didn't ask the world to bow. She simply stood still until it saw her. The morning sun stretched slowly across Lorraine's backyard, warming the dew from her roses as she stood with her watering can in hand. The petals, soft and bright, glistened beneath her care, their colors more vibrant now, perhaps because they knew peace had returned. Her pool sat undisturbed behind her, its surface smooth and still, reflecting her image like glass. She paused to watch it, her silhouette caught in the water, strong, steady, and beautifully alone. Not lonely, just full. She sipped her tea quietly, the steam curling in the cool air. The world hadn't changed overnight, but her corner of it had learned. And sometimes that was enough. Some women protect their peace with locks, others with lessons. Have you ever had to defend your peace in silence? If this story made you feel something, share it. Someone out there needs to see that strength doesn't always shout. Thank you for watching. And remember, dignity, when tested, becomes legacy.